This house believes that the state should never finance private museums and galleries. And this is the motion to be debated today. If you are ready, and when you are ready to speak, please, as usual, tell me, say something like 3 to 1, so that I'm sure I start the time. Please.
Three, two, one. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this debate. My name is Quarti, and today I'll be the first speaker for side proposition. First of all, let's see the motion. This House believes that the state should never finance private museums and galleries. First of all, let's give some definitions. To finance means to give monetary funds, and in the motion, to funds to private museums and galleries. And then, what are private museums and galleries? They are museums and galleries owned by individuals or private companies. Now, as a first speaker, I'm going to delve into the first and the second argument, which are, first of all, not financing private museums and galleries would support the value of art and history. And secondly, public museums, unlike private ones, are greatly beneficial to the education of future generations. Then, my teammate, Mariano, will delve into the third argument, which is that private museums already have enough funding. So, now, moving to my first argument. So, why we should not finance private museums? Because not financing private museums and galleries supports the value of art and history by making it more accessible to all. In fact, art is what defines the culture of a country, and museums hold our most valuable records of history. So, why should we not fund private museums and galleries? Private ones tickets, first of all, are on average much more expensive than the ones of public museums, meaning that they are not as accessible, especially for lower income individuals. So, because of that, and because also of the educational value that these museums hold, as we'll explain more into our second argument, we should avoid funding private museums and focus more on all our available resources on growing and improving also the network of public museums. So, by focusing on public, we can ensure that all of the population will have access to high-quality museums to understand and also get in contact with the state's culture and history. This is extremely valuable. We strongly believe that everyone has an equal opportunity to access these important culture institution hotspots. Funding public museums and galleries means that we will be able to better maintain both the structures and also these pieces, as well as to offer better services to the public. This leads to our second argument, which is that the public museums, unlike the private ones, are very beneficial in order to educate our future generations. In fact, this money that will be got by our government will be used in public museums to educate the public, especially children and students, in, first of all, organizing activity. Secondly, creating special guided visits, and thirdly, offering discounts to students and also teachers. So, first of all, we said that meanwhile private museums only care about their own pieces, public museums will want firstly to educate with... Yeah.
So, are you stating that the art pieces that are in those private museums have no value whatsoever?
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about this. We said that In private museums, these pieces of art are taken, are bought by these private individuals in order also to get profit. However, while these private museums will use these pieces of art to get profit, in public museum wants first of all to use these pieces to educate the public first of all, and then also to get some profit. Meaning that with this, if we finance private museums, these private museums will just get more and more money to use to buy more and more pieces of art. While if we finance public museums, this money will be used by public museums to more incentivate the education for children and future generations. So moving to our speech again. Therefore, if we educate this future generation, the state money will be used to finance activities such as workshops. And it's not, that means that young people will be more interested in these fulfilling activities from which they will also learn more. And in fact, this leads to the second goal of this public museum, which is creating also special guided visits that will be made exclusively for children or students, assuring that these young people, these students, will be more able to fully understand the history and importance of that piece of art. And finally, only public museums will offer discounts that encourage the public, especially for students and teachers. These ones then will be incentivized to come visit these public museums and galleries. Therefore, more and more public, especially we said future generations, will be more happy to come to visit these public museums, and then, as we said in our first argument, because public museums tickets are less expensive than private museums, there will be more access to all the public, so also to maybe individuals that get more money, that get less money. So, all in all, we think that for all these arguments, side proposition has the right to win, because first of all, we wanted not to finance private museums because it will support the value of art and history, and finally, because these public museums will be financed by the government, and this money will be used to educate our future generations. So, all in all, my speech is finished. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
The time elapsed is 7 minutes 10 seconds. Okay, so please, now is the turn of the first speaker of the opposition team. Please, Rita Chiara, tell me when you're going to start.
Yes, just a second.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. A word without culture is a meaningless word. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rita Chiara, and I will speak in this debate as the first speaker of the opposition team. We will present to you our case line, hence why we believe that the state should, in any ways, finance museums and galleries, and we will explain with the 3 points why we believe this. Before doing this, I shall firstly present some of our disagreements with some of the things that were just explained by the other team. In a more accurate way, two are our disagreements with their beliefs. First of all, it was said by the proposition team that private museums are not as accessible to the public as public museums, so the state should focus on financing public museums. But because in public museums there are a lot of works of art that can be admired by the public. But we have to mention, and this will be also explained in a better way later by the rest of our house and by myself, that in private museums there are lots and lots of works of art made by very famous and important artists that of course cannot be ignored in any way. And later on we will be making also some examples of some of these artists. The second thing on which we have to disagree is the fact that they said money used by the state to finance public museums will be used for educational, is used and will be used for educational activities, while they also said that private museums want to own pieces of art just because they want to earn money. And to this we say, and what is the problem with that? Why not wanting to earn money? Private museums are structures that are in some places in the city or outside the city, wherever they are, but they are in any way structures and have to pay in some way the things that they have to pay. This will also be mentioned and explained better in our case line. It was said that only public museums organize activities to educate people and make young people, for instance, more interested in the objects that are exposed in the museums. But with the money that the state would give, according to our case line and to our beliefs, to private museums, wouldn't it be a perfect way for private museums to organize as well not only educational activities, but returning to the first point on which we disagree, wouldn't it be a better way for private museums to be less expensive and more affordable and accessible for the public?
Point of information.
Yes, tell me.
Don't you think that the reasons that private museums are more expensive is just that they are more so focused on earning money than educating people?
Thank you for the interesting question. Actually, as I already explained, private museums, since they are in their own private structure, perhaps want to earn more money by having less accessible prices for the entrance, because they have to go on in a way, because they have to pay to the state, for example, bills and the rent of the area. This was, as I said before, actually one of the reasons why we disagree with the motion, and we believe that the state should finance private museums and galleries. But our real case 9 is actually composed of these 3 main points. The first main point is called more funds equal more tourism, and I will be the one explaining it to you. The second point is called the importance of cultural heritage, and the third point is called the consequences of lack of finances. And these other two points will be then explained better by the rest of our house. Now, to present to you better our first point. As I've already stated before, in private museums there are a lot of works of art that were made by very famous and important artists. Before I said that I was going to give you some examples, there are some private museums that own pieces of art made by Pablo Picasso and Vincent van Gogh, and denying these structures their money would bring these structures and the private museums to bankruptcy. So,
Information.
yes.
Don't you think these museums that are private already have enough money since they are owned by very rich people?
But this isn't a thing that has to be taken for sure. There can be some private museums that they are private, but they are private exactly because they need money. As I was saying before, the state, by financing private museums, would help them to attract more tourists and maybe make the entrance more accessible to the public. And also, it would avoid creating a chain reaction that would happen if this financing situation made from the state to the private museums would not happen. Because if the state wouldn't finance private museums, then, as I said before, these private museums wouldn't have enough money to pay rent and to pay the bills, and then these would close, shut down, and then tourists would not go there anymore, and these structures would not give any more money to the state, to the government. And this would lead to bankruptcy of the whole state in which the private museum is located. I hope I've made myself clear, and I give the floor to the next speaker.
The time lapse is 8 minutes 07. So, we are ready to... That's it, okay? When you are ready, Mariano, please, the second speaker, you can go.
Thank you. My speech will begin in 3, 2, 1, now. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Mariano Abruzzo for said proposition, and I will be the second speaker of today, showing you a third and final argument as to why we firmly believe that governments should stop paying, should never pay and finance private museums and art galleries. So our third and final point will be about how these private museums and art galleries do not need the extra funding from the government, as they already have it on their own. However, before I get to our final argument, I would like to rebut what has been said so far by side opposition. So I'm going to go in order of the various statements that they had. So they started out by talking about how we cannot ignore all of the famous and important art that is exposed in these privately owned art galleries and museums. However, I want to make it very clear that they would be ignored on our side of the house. We are not abolishing those private museums in any way. They would still be available for the public to view, if they can afford the price of the ticket, of course. Everything that would happen on our side of the house is that the money that the government uses would actually be spent on public museums instead of private museums. So we would shift our focus on the public museums. But the private ones would still remain, and all their art would still be viewable by the public. Then another statement that they made, which was in rebuttal to our arguments when we said that we should favor public museums because they're more focused on education, whereas private museums are focused mainly on making profits. So what they said in response to this was that, what's the problem with wanting to make money? Now, we don't have a problem with companies and museums, etc., that want to make money. We have a problem, and that is their primary focus. And no, thank you. Just a moment. We have a problem, and that's their primary focus, because we believe that any art installation should focus on educating people and on spreading around the value of art instead of making money, which should be their secondary goal in order to sustain themselves. I will now take a point of information.
So, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to ask you, don't you think that when the state finances the private museums, these museums could offer some way better services, but also the tickets would cost way less? Thank you.
Thank you for the important information. No, we do not believe that. And that is also because of what we've just said. Privately owned museums and art galleries are focused on making money. This means that they have no interest in lowering the cost of their tickets. Whereas publicly owned museums have been created with the intent to educate people. So if any type of museum financed by the state is going to lower the price of their ticket, it is going to be publicly owned ones and not private ones, which is actually something that I'm going to talk about in our argument. Now, continuing on with our rebuttal, they mentioned the fact that private museums and art galleries also have some expenses to cover, such as the bills, the price of the area, etc., which we agree with. Of course, they also have some expenses to cover, but in the same way, so do publicly owned museums. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is that the privately owned museums already have all the funding that they need in order to cover these expenses because they are owned by extremely rich people. Now, this is something that they actually disagreed with. They said that we can't be certain that they're owned by particularly wealthy people. However, as I'm going to say in just a little bit in our argument, there is clear evidence that shows that it's impossible for these art galleries and museums that are privately owned to even exist unless they were to be owned by rich people. So I will now get to the argument. Let's consider that if an individual has the money to be able to afford so many great, famous and important pieces of art to create a whole gallery or museum out of it, they clearly have enough money to be able to sustain the business. Otherwise, they would not be spending it on pieces of art instead of ways to make more money in order to be able to afford this business. So they have no need for this extra funding because they already have it on their own. And since the state has a limited budget that they can spend in the sector of art, it means that all of the money that is being given to this privately owned museum is actively being taken away from all of the money that is being given to publicly owned museums, which, as we've said, is the kind of museums and art galleries that we prefer, because they will actually have a use for this money since they don't have enough on their own to cover it. All of these uses could be, for example, expanding their collection, restoring damaged art, making activities for the audience, as we already stated, but also lowering the price of their tickets or even making them free, which is something that they are going to want to do because they are created with the intent to educate the public instead of with the intent of making monetary gain for their owners, since they are public. Essentially, the point of the matter is that financing private art installations is a waste of precious money that could instead be put to much better use in the public sector. Now, before I end my speech, I would like to ask the opposition team if they have any POIs.
No, we don't.
Alright, so if the opposition team has no points of information, I will then quickly recap all the various points that have been stated so far by my side of the house and then in my speech. So far we've been able to show you that publicly owned museums are actually extremely important when it comes to spreading the value and the importance and all of culture and identity that comes from art and various pieces of history to the public. And because of this reason, because of this principle that is behind all the publicly owned museums, then we should focus all the funding that is being given in the Department of Art by governments to these publicly owned museums and art galleries, since if they were to be given to publicly owned galleries and museums, they would essentially be wasted, since they already have enough money on their own and they have no incentive to use this money to improve the educational effects of their business, since it is only meant as well a business and not an educational resource. And it is for all of these reasons that we firmly believe that governments should stop and never finance privately owned art museums or galleries. Thank you, that's the end of my speech.
Eight minutes and 3 seconds. So please, you are the second speaker of the opposition team, Francesca. Tell me when to start.
Right. So I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Francesca Ridocco, and today I'm here as the second speaker of the opposition team. Today I'm here in order to explain the second and third point of our argumentative line, but before I would like to tell the audience why we do not agree with some of the statements brought up by the proposition team. First of all, I would like to specify that it has been said that private tickets are much more expensive in comparison with those in public museums, and we do not agree with that statement because also, when, as I also asked, don't you think that when the state finances the private museums, this could offer some way better services, but also the tickets would cost less? Then I would like to go on with another point of clash, that was the one of public museums, because I heard that it has been said that public museums are beneficial in order to educate the future generations. But in our opinion, our historical background in their artistic field is fundamental in education in all of its forms. So basically both private and public ones. Private and public museums are both very important and fundamental for our historical and artistical background and for our education, especially concerning children and students. Going on with another point I would like to check. So it has been said that people are more able to understand art in public museums, but this is a contradiction in itself, given that any school or family could organize a tour-guided trip in private museums. I would like to go on with another point, because the other team, the proposition team, mentioned some discounts for students in public museums. But I would like to remind the audience that even in private museums we have a lot of subscriptions that can be about that concern students and schools. So it makes no difference. There is no difference between private and public museums concerning this field. Another thing that has been stated by the other team is that private museums are more interested in earning money instead of creating and diffusing culture and art, because money is their only aim. And I think this is a very big point of clash up until now from the beginning, because we already discussed a lot on this point. I would like to specify that, first of all, if a person decides to be the head of a museum, a private museum in this case, this person is supposed to be a very passionate person concerning the artistic field, and not only a rich person that decides to manage a private museum in order to guarantee much money, a lot of money. Another important thing that has been stated is that only rich people have private museums. But my mate already explained that it is not certain that it is this way, and this could be a common job. Moreover,
if these owners aren't as rich as we say they are, then how come they have such valuable pieces of art that cost millions and millions of dollars?
thank you for your interesting question. I was going to reach that point later, but I will answer this question right now. So, in our opinion, the owners of the private museums are people that are very interested in the artistic field. Since you are stating that they are very rich people, don't you think that the money that comes from the state could only help? And then another important thing we have to specify is that if the financial help from the state exists, it's because not all the private museums have a rich owner that can afford the treatments, such as the fact that we have to restore the paintings, the sculptures, and so on. So I would like to specify that they are not that rich if they have to pay the salaries of tour guides or employees, but also they have to pay the restore, and they have to pay the tour guides. Another important thing that has been stated is that they are very rich. But don't you think, I would like to ask you a question, don't you think that in this case, tickets would not exist if a person didn't need that money? Now I would like to go on with our second point, or with the second point of our argumentative line, that concerns the fact that our cultural heritage is very important. So a point that concerns the importance of our cultural heritage. As a matter of fact, our history and art are fundamental parts when we have to learn about a country we are visiting, for example, and when we have to choose what to visit in our country, we always go visit museums, for example, we look at the art, etc. And we think that the cultural heritage that we can observe will come from both, so private and public museums. We do not have to forget that some of the most important works of art are contained in private museums, such as some very beautiful works of art, also from Botticelli, Picasso, Van Gogh. And also concerning our third point, so the consequences of this lack of finances. Because if in the terrible situation in which the state didn't help the private museums, there would be horrible consequences, such as the fact that employers and tour guides, but also the owners, would not be able to restore the paintings, but also the sculptures, etc., and to keep them in perfect conditions when people have to visit them. We would like to avoid this very bad situation, because there will be less money, and the money that comes from the tickets would not be used in order to restore the paintings or make them better, to make the whole museum better, but just in order to pay the salaries or the expenses that are fundamental. I would like to conclude my speech by specifying that this situation would be totally unacceptable in our opinion, given that we will be standing in front of one of the biggest loss we could ever face, which is the loss of our historical background. Having said this, I would like to specify that our argumentative line is based on the general welfare. So thank you all for listening to me, and I give the floor to the next speaker.
Right. So 7 minutes 50. That's okay, so please, I invite the third speaker of the proposition team to give a speech. Please, Asia, when you're ready.
My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and esteemed judges. Thank you for the floor. My name is Asia, and today I will be the third speaker for the side proposition in this debate. Now, I would like to start my speech by offering some rebuttal to the points that have been brought forward by the second speaker of side opposition, and then I would like to move on to the main points of clashes in this debate. Now, first of all, the second speaker has said that, as well as the first speaker actually, have said that private will be less expensive, especially tickets, with funds from the government. Now, if we think that private will be less expensive, then why not focus on public that is already less expensive, and this way make art and culture and the history of our countries way more accessible? Why make private art galleries and museums be at the same level as public when we can lower public even more to make sure that everyone has the equal and fair access to these important resources for their education and for understanding the culture and history of our country? Then they moved on to say that public museums aren't more important to education, especially for children, as well as saying that any school or students or family can have guides in private museums as well, and also saying that private museums have subscriptions for school and students. Now, we acknowledge that. However, it is nothing compared to what public museums and art galleries can offer. Public art museums and galleries, as we said in our first speech, can offer many other resources for students and their schools. For example, they can offer guided tour, specific guided tour for younger audiences, organizing activities, and especially for children, this can be very, very important to their understanding, as they will learn a lot more through doing and being explained in more depth. And they will also offer discounts to teachers and students that many of the private institutions don't actually offer. And for all of these reasons, we think that public museums are much more crucial in the education of future generations than privates can be, because they offer a wider variety of services for them and specifically for them. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to ask you, don't you think that, given what you're saying, the state should finance both private and public museums?
No, because as we said, public museums already have these things in place. Privates don't, and we don't have the certainty that privates will do once they have the funds, because privates aren't necessarily invested into education, while we know that public is, so we should invest all of our money into public museums, because we know they already have these activities and services in place, so we can make them better and make them even more than what they already are. And we have this certainty that private art galleries and museums cannot, unfortunately, offer us. Then they've also moved on to say that most owners are just passionate and interested in art, and the state money could help them because they have many expenses and not all of them are rich. Now, if you are an owner of a few pieces of art, and let's say, for instance, following what opposition is saying, they are not rich. They have just maybe inherited it or come across it in some way that we cannot explain. In this case, they would have to be very irresponsible to open an art gallery or a museum with these pieces, knowing all of the expenses that this comes with, because they would have to pay bills, they would have to pay for the structure, make sure that the structure is in good condition for the guests to visit, they will have to pay staff, they will have to have many expenses that if they are not rich, they are not ready to sustain, so why would they do it? If they were just passionate, then they would acquire the pieces of art and simply keep them in their homes or in their possession because they are passionate of it and want to keep it. So they would be very irresponsible to not be rich and open a museum or an art gallery. And so most likely the owners of these galleries are very rich. Yes.
Sorry, why do you believe that private museums don't have any interest in making and organizing educational activities?
Well, I think that because right now in status quo, the majority of private museums often do not offer half of these services, if not any. Many of them only offer guided tours and at best a guided tour for children, while all of the other activities that public museums offer aren't available right now. So why would we believe that by giving them more and more funds, they will magically start offering them? We just don't have them guaranteed, so we shouldn't take this risk. We should invest in where we know that they already have these available. Then they moved on to say in their argument about heritage that we choose to visit museums, both private and public, because we want to choose to visit something that has cultural importance. And they also said that a massive benefit to why people choose private museums is that there are important works. But as we've said, private museums are much more expensive. So most people will actually prefer going to a public museum that is much less expensive and maybe not see that one important work of art and enjoy the many others that are in the public museum just to spend less, because the private museums are unfortunately much less cheap. And also they moved to say in their third argument about the consequences of the lack of funds that they wouldn't be able to restore the pieces, they wouldn't be able to afford the fundamental expenses, and they've also made, in our opinion, a very exaggerated analogy to a chain reaction that would lead to state bankruptcy. We think that this is just exaggerated. This will not happen, especially if we avoid funding them and we fund the public museums, because we know that the public museums will not shut down on a whim from the owner ever, and we have more certainties that this will lead to more income for the state. So we believe that funding is not the right choice to ensure the best consequences possible. Now, I would like to briefly get to the points of clash in this debate. Now, the first one was education. They said that the private museums are very interested in the education of children and future generations, but we have disproved that by showing that most of these private ones don't have these kind of services that public museums have available. Then they talked about the future of museums and the states in general, and they have said that without funds to privates there will be no tourism and very dire consequences, that we think that by investing in public institutions will attract even more tourism than the privates ever could, and will lead to a better future for the state. Now, for all of these reasons, we urge you to stand with the proposition. Thank you. I have finished.
8 minutes, 10 seconds. So, please, we are at the last constructive speech, the third speaker of the opposition team. Please, Kevin, when you're ready.
May I start? Because I see the judge still writing. I do not want him to fall behind. May I?
I'm ready.
Very well. So I will go ahead and start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Servalli, and today I will be intervening in this debate as the third speaker of the opposition team. Now, to make it clear what I will do right now, I will just take the burden upon myself to highlight 6 major issues that the opposition house has found throughout the proposition house's critical case line throughout this whole debate. So let us start from the top. First of all, let's start with the model, if it can even be called such, that they have proposed, which was simply about sending all the money that the government would lend to private museums to public ones. That is simply unreasonable. Why? Because if you just send money from private museums, which you so much accuse of being too rich already, would that not just make, in comparison, public museums too rich, following your logic? That just makes no sense, first of all. Moreover, another issue that was explored is a huge contradiction in which it was stated that private museums do not help culture and art grow. So, with that, the simple issue is that by saying that, it's simply stating that the art kept in those private museums is meaningless, and this all ties to any possible doubts following the third problem that is, once again, major, being that it has been stated once again that private museums only accumulate art pieces and public ones are the ones that educate and allow culture to grow. That is, once again, a complete contradiction in itself, given that as it has already been stated by our House, it is completely free for anyone of their own free will to just organize any trip or tour guide to private museums. There is no restriction or prohibition that doesn't allow anyone to just go there and see those priceless art pieces that have been already enlisted with big shot names such as, once again, Picasso, Van Gogh, and how many others. Please go ahead.
Don't you think that the excessive price of private museums is already a restriction in itself?
Well, that actually ties to your fourth major issue. And let's get right into that. Thank you for anticipating it. So, you have stated that the tickets in those private museums are high and possibly too big. So the problem with that is that, well, it is true that they are higher, as you say. The issue is that if we take the actual statement that has been given by the proposition house that the private museums have more art pieces, people that go there are just paying more to see more and to educate themselves more and to get to know more art and more culture. So where's the issue in paying more to see more, we ask you? No, thank you, to move on. Moving on, another point of information which was completely senseless was made to our House, in which it has been asked whether private museums already have enough money or not. Well, the answer is already quite clear. Absolutely not. And let me explain exactly why. First of all, there is no guarantee whatsoever that the owners of these structures are already rich. That's just hearsay. Furthermore, the money that they have is just rightfully earned by painstakingly working through countless years, no thank you, to keep all those priceless and countless art pieces in good and stable conditions throughout the years. Is that not a noble job? Is that a job worth less than any other? Because while it may be private, it's still a job that somebody does from someone else. Because while it's their possession, it wasn't made by them, it is kept by them. Let's highlight that little detail, shall we? Now, another problem with that is that, as I was saying, it's just speculation at this point, because if you say that if we were to take in the possibility that people can be too rich to make these structures and keep those art pieces. Again, what's more, it's speculation, because at this point we can just speculate even more and take into account the possibility of what are known as backstage deals and undocumented contracts to let these structures come to life, in which the government also can take part, because as we all know, nothing is pure and corruption exists. So why should we argue a possibility when it's just speculation in itself? With that, I want to mention the other issue, which was with the following statement, in which it has been said that private museums are irresponsible in not hiring people to organize events, to have tour guides. First of all, like before, there is no guarantee of that, because there may or may not be some private museums or galleries that do that unbeknownst to us, first of all. And second of all, there is a major motivation to why maybe they don't, and that's quite logical. Let's explore it. The problem is that being private museums, government expects them to work on their own and to be able to just do stuff themselves. So, as much as they want themselves to be making the money on their own without any financial sustainability whatsoever, they also do not guarantee them any insurance in case of loss, because it's their property. What can they do about it? You lost it and it's gone. Unlike public museums, which are so highly riveted and covered by, or maybe even more cradled by the government, because they keep stuff that is public even more to people. Well, here's the other issue. The problem is that, okay, they're public and more people can access it and maybe more people can go to it. Why? Simply because they just make events to to have more people come. That's just a business strategy. It doesn't mean that no tourists whatsoever go visit the private ones. It's just a strategy to let them come, and besides, it's no museum whatsoever forces any people to go there and pay the high price. It's a choice you can make of your own free will, because education is guaranteed by the school. But the ones that is present in art museums is something that you can completely do on your own, as has been stated, with your family, organization, guided tours, things that you can just choose to do. So if you want to do it, you pay the price. That's just normal reasoning logic. So to end it all, I'd just like to once again restate the motivations that have been given by our house on why it is a completely wrong thing to not give them money, as it has been stated by contradictions, computation of buttons, and our house's statements, that more funds mean you make more people come, which just makes more money. This money helps culture, which is art itself, and denying that is denying history, and with that, we all know that the consequences of not selling is not getting money, which is the cycle of decay. With that, thank you for listening to me, and I pass the word to the next speaker.
So 8 minutes and 5 seconds. That's it. So you're over with the constructive speeches, and we are at the reply speeches. The first one is the opposition's reply, and I invite Rita Chiara to give it. Rita.
All right. I will start in 3, 2, 1. Hello again, I'm still Rita Chiara, and now I will intervene in this debate as the reply of my team, hence the opposition team. I will, during my speech, expose the 2 points of clash that I found during this debate and re-expose to the audience our argumentative line, hence the argumentative line of the opposition team, and the argumentative line of the proposition team. The first and the main point of clash that I found during this debate was the aim of private museums. So the fact if private museums make money because they need it and because they want to spread culture to the public and to the people, and this is our point of view, or if private museums want to make money because they just want to have more and more money. Our house point of view states that private museums need and want to spread culture thanks to money, because private museums need money because just because a museum is private, as it was already said by our house, it doesn't mean that the structure is in itself a rich structure, because it has to pay institutional things like, as it was already stated, bills and rent and other things, and also has to pay tour guides and all the restores of the works of art and other very important things. And then we believe that private museums need money because they want to spread culture, because we said that private museums can be owned by people who are very interested in art, and people who are who can be quite rich and own pieces of art and want to open their museums to the public, even though the museums are still private, because they want to spread the culture that they have inside their structures. They want to spread whatever they are preserving inside their museums. The other team's point of view was, as I said before, the fact that private museums want to make money just because they want to have more money. It was also stated, was also asked, why lower private museums' prices if we can make public museums even cheaper than they are now? And to this, we will respond based on our point of view that if we help private museums with the financing of the state, then all the people will have the same opportunities and possibilities to access private museums and observe all other works of art that are preserved also in private museums. The other point of clash was the fact regarding tickets, and that is strictly linked to this first point of clash. To assume our case lines, our case line was composed of these 3 points, so more funds equal more tourism, the importance of cultural heritage and the consequences of lack of finances, and was in general focused on the importance of exposing and preserving priceless art pieces. While their case line was simply stating of why the state should finance public museums and not private museums. Thank you for listening to me.
Time lapse 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Okay, so I invite the reply speaker of the proposition team. Mariano, please.
Thank you. My speech will begin in 3, 2, 1. Now, thank you everyone. We've finally come to the end of this debate. I would like to thank the opposition team for the very interesting arguments that they brought forward today. However, ultimately, I believe that this debate was ultimately won by said proposition. And in order to highlight why I think that's the case, I will go through what I believe have been the main points of clash in this discussion that we've had today, and highlight why I believe that we've been able to provide a stronger or better case regarding those points of clashes, which are mainly the richness of private museum and art galleries owners, then whether the value of art is preserved more by private museums or public ones, and then finally where funding would be best spent, whether it be on public museums or private ones. So starting from the first point of clash, the richness of the individuals who own private museums. Now, Kai's side opposition argued that the people who own private museums have to face a lot of expenses, and that we cannot be sure that they are rich enough to be able to cover these expenses by themselves. However, we on our side of the house believe and have shown logical reason as to why this cannot be the case, which is simply the fact that these art pieces are extremely expensive, and if someone is able to afford all of these extremely expensive art pieces, then there is no way that they cannot have the money to be able to keep a building in proper conditions and to restore the art pieces that they've already bought for a lot of money. So because of that, we believe that on this point of clash, we've been able to provide a clear case as to why these people are surely rich and already have the funds they need, thus not needing any more from the state. Then coming to the point of clash of whether private museums or public museums do more work to preserve the value of art and history and culture in general. Now, it is true that, as opposition side has stated, private museums also are able to spread the value and importance of art and culture. However, the evidence shows that public museums do a better job of this by providing more workshops, more tour guides, more events, etc., etc. And this actually is not only backed up by evidence, but by logical facts, which we have stated before, which is simply the fact, and this is also helped by Kay's opposition, when they stated that private museums are not protected in case of bankruptcy, or at least not as much as public ones. This means that public ones can allow themselves to risk more by having lower prices and by making more events, which could cause them to lose money, but it is not a problem for them since they are backed up by the state, whereas private museums only try their best to keep their state of richness. And ultimately, where funding will be best spent, Kay's opposition argued that we should try to split it and finance both public and private ones. However, we believe that there is more than enough reasons to say that it should just go, funding from the state should just go to public museums and art galleries, because the private ones already have all of the funding provided by the people that own them, since we've been able to show you why the people who own them are rich already, whereas public ones really need that funding. So because of this, I believe that ultimately the win has to go to side proposition. Thank you.
4 minutes, 19 seconds. Silence then. Oh well, thank you.